Somewhere on the slopes of Mount Helicon in Boeotia, around the year 700 BC, a farmer's son was tending sheep when something happened to him. He describes the experience himself, at the beginning of his poem, in words that have been read and argued over for nearly 3,000 years. The Muses came to him. 9 goddesses of poetry and memory, daughters of Zeus and Memory herself, appeared to a shepherd on a hillside and gave him a laurel staff, the sign of the poet-prophet, and breathed into him the gift of song. They told him something that no divine being had said so directly to a mortal before: we know how to tell many lies that resemble truth, and when we wish, we know how to speak the truth. The man's name was Hesiod, and he is the first European poet whose name we know, the first whose words survive in more than fragments, and the first who tells us about his own life in his own poems. Homer, his near contemporary, and the other foundational poet of European literature, hides behind the epic tradition. We do not know his name with certainty, his city, his century, his circumstances. Hesiod steps forward. He tells us his father came from Cyme in Asia Minor, crossed the sea to escape poverty, and settled in the village of Askra in Boeotia at the foot of Helicon, a place Hesiod describes with the unsparing clarity of someone who grew up there. A wretched hamlet, bad in winter, miserable in summer, and never pleasant. He tells us his brother's name. He tells us they quarreled over their inheritance. He tells us what he thinks of corrupt judges. This is new in the history of literature. Homer's poems are vast and impersonal, their narrator invisible behind the heroes and the gods. Hesiod is present in his poems as a specific person with specific grievances in a specific place. The distance between them is not merely stylistic. It is the distance between an aristocratic tradition of heroic song and something that had not existed before, the voice of an ordinary man speaking about the world he actually inhabited. Askra and the world that made the poems. Boeotia in the Archaic period was not a prestigious address. The Boeotians were considered by their neighbors, the Athenians especially, to be slow, agricultural, and intellectually unimpressive. The Boeotian farmer's year was one of physical labor calibrated against the movements of stars and seasons, with little margin for error. A bad harvest meant genuine hardship, and the mechanisms of debt and dependence that accumulated around agricultural failure were severe. Hesiod knew this world from the inside. His father had emigrated to escape exactly this kind of marginal existence in Asia Minor, and had found more of the same in Boeotia. The dispute with his brother Perses, who appears in the Works and Days as the immediate audience for the poem, may be historical or may be a literary device, but either way it grounds the poem in material reality. Perses, in Hesiod's account, squandered his share of the inheritance, then bribed corrupt local officials, gift-devouring kings, to award him a larger portion. Instead of retaliating through the same corrupt channels, Hesiod writes a poem. He addresses Perses directly, telling him what justice is, what work requires, and what the gods demand of human beings who want to live decent lives. The poem is simultaneously a philosophical treatise, a farming manual, and an angry letter to a brother who cheated him. This combination has not been repeated in quite the same way since. The Theogony, mapping the invisible world. The Theogony, the birth of the gods, is Hesiod's attempt to do something that no one had done before in Greek literature, to organize the entire divine world into a systematic narrative, tracing the genealogies of the gods from the very beginning of things to the establishment of Zeus's authority. This is not mythology as entertainment. It is mythology as cosmology, an account of how the universe came to be structured the way it is, why things are arranged as they are, and what the underlying principles of existence might be. The beginning is chaos, not the modern meaning of disorder, but something closer to the Greek meaning, a yawning gap, an abyss, an absence of differentiation rather than a disorder of existing things. From chaos come Gaia, earth, the stable ground of all existence, and Eros, which Hesiod places at the very beginning of things as the generative force that makes union and creation possible. From night and darkness come light and day. Gaia gives birth without a partner to Uranus, the starry sky, and from the union of earth and sky the first great generation of divine beings is produced, the 12 titans, among them Kronos and Rhea, Oceanus and Mnemosyne, Memory herself, who will eventually bear the Muses. The sequence of cosmic generations is a sequence of conflicts, each one establishing a new order at the cost of the old. Uranus, afraid of his children, pushes them back into the earth as soon as they are born. Gaia, exhausted by the pressure of so many imprisoned children, produces an adamantine sickle and asks her sons to castrate their father. Only Kronos agrees. He ambushes Uranus, takes the sickle to him, and throws the severed parts into the sea. From the blood that falls on the earth come the Furies and the giants, from the foam that gathers around the genitals floating in the sea comes Aphrodite, born from the mixing of divine blood with seawater. Kronos, now in power, falls into the same pattern as his father. He swallows his children one by one as they are born, knowing that a son will eventually overthrow him. Rhea saves the youngest, Zeus, by wrapping a stone in swaddling clothes for Kronos to swallow in his place and hiding the infant in Crete. Zeus grows up, tricks his father into vomiting up his siblings, and begins the 10-year war against the Titans, the Titanomachy. With the help of the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants whom Uranus had also imprisoned, the Titans are defeated and thrown into Tartarus. Zeus defeats the last great monster, Typhon, and distributes sovereignty among the gods. What Hesiod is describing is not random mythological narrative. It is a theory of cosmic development, the movement from formless potential through increasingly ordered structures to a stable divine monarchy that guarantees the principles of justice and order. The Greek word cosmos means both order and ornament. A well-ordered thing is beautiful precisely because it is ordered. The Theogony is an account of how the cosmos came to be cosmos, how the beautiful order of the world emerged from the violence and chaos of its origin. Prometheus, Pandora, and the price of fire. Between the Theogony and the Works and Days, Hesiod tells the story of Prometheus twice. Once in each poem, with variations that have kept scholars arguing about the relationship between the versions ever since. Together they form the most consequential myth about the human condition in the Greek tradition, the story of how human beings came to have fire, why they have to work, and why they suffer. Prometheus, whose name means something close to forethought, was a Titan who sided with Zeus in the Titanomachy and who became, in the mythological tradition, the particular patron of human beings. In Hesiod's version, he steals fire from the gods and gives it to humanity after Zeus had withheld it, possibly as punishment for an earlier trick Prometheus had played at a sacrificial feast, where he arranged things so that humans got the better portion of the animal and the gods got the bones dressed in fat. Zeus is not amused. The response to the theft of fire is Pandora, the first woman, made by Hephaestus from clay at Zeus's direction, and given gifts by all the gods, beauty from Aphrodite, persuasion from Hermes, needlework and weaving from Athena, and from Hermes also a lying nature and the character of a thief. She is sent to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, whose name means afterthought, as a gift. Prometheus had warned his brother never to accept gifts from Zeus. Epimetheus accepts her anyway. Pandora brings with her a large storage jar, a pithos, not the box of later tradition, which entered the story through a mistranslation by Erasmus, containing all the evils that now afflict human life, diseases, sorrows, toil, and the countless other miseries that make human existence difficult. She opens it. Everything escapes. Only one thing remains at the bottom when she closes it again, elpis, which means hope, or expectation. The one thing that prevents human beings from giving up entirely in the face of the suffering they must now endure. The interpretation of this myth has occupied philosophers and scholars for millennia. Why is hope left in the jar? Is it a good thing that it remains, sustaining human beings through their suffering, or is it ambiguous, since hope can also delay facing reality? Is Pandora herself a punishment, or is she simply the price of fire? Hesiod does not answer these questions. He presents the myth with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone reporting history, and leaves the interpretation to the reader. The story is 3,000 years old and the questions it raises have not been resolved. The 5 Ages, a theory of historical decline. Among the most influential passages in the Works and Days is Hesiod's account of the 5 ages of humanity. The mythological framework through which he explains why human life is so difficult and why the present generation seems worse than those who came before. It is the first systematic theory of history in European literature, and it has haunted Western thought ever since. The first age was the Golden Age, when humanity lived under the rule of Kronos, without labor, without disease, without old age, feasting and drinking freely, dying gently as if falling asleep. The people of this age became, after their death, daimons, benevolent spirits who wander the earth and watch over human beings, invisible guardians of justice. The Silver Age was worse. The children of this age spent 100 years in infantile dependency before reaching a brief adulthood characterized by violence, impiety, and the refusal to offer sacrifices to the gods. Zeus destroyed them and hid them underground, where they remain as honored spirits but no longer active in the world. The Bronze Age was worse still, a race of warriors, hard and terrible, made entirely of bronze, who spent their lives fighting each other until they destroyed themselves and descended nameless into the underworld. Here Hesiod inserts something unexpected, a 4th age, not of metal but of heroes, the demigods of myth, the warriors of Thebes and Troy, who are better than the Bronze Age but still mortal. After death they live on the islands of the blessed at the edges of the earth, in a kind of paradise. This age interrupts the sequence of decline. It is better than what preceded it, and scholars have argued for centuries about why Hesiod included it. The most persuasive explanation is that he needed to accommodate the heroic tradition that Homer represented. The Age of Heroes is the age of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which could not simply be assigned to one of the Metal Ages without doing violence to the tradition. And then Hesiod's own age, the Iron Age, in which he lives. Would that I were not among the men of the 5th generation, he writes, but either had died before or been born afterward. The Iron Age is characterized by unceasing toil, the erosion of family bonds and friendships, the dominance of might over right, and the progressive abandonment of the earth by the goddesses of shame and justice, who rise to Olympus as the age grows worse. The implication is that the Iron Age will eventually destroy itself. Hesiod says children will be born with gray at their temples, and then it will be over. This is a profoundly pessimistic theory of history, and it is all the more striking because Hesiod does not present it as a reason for despair. The Works and Days is, after the myth, a practical manual: plant when the Pleiades rise, harvest when they set, make your plow from this wood and that wood, treat your neighbors fairly, pay your debts, don't sleep too late, watch the stars. The Iron Age is terrible, but you still have to get the harvest in. The good strife and the bad strife. One of Hesiod's most original philosophical contributions is his distinction between 2 kinds of Eris, the goddess of strife, at the beginning of the Works and Days. In the Theogony, Eris is simply a negative force, the mother of toil and forgetfulness and pain. In the Works and Days, Hesiod corrects himself: there are 2 Erides, not 1. The bad Eris is the one everyone knows, the spirit of destructive conflict, war, litigation, hatred, and the desire to tear down rather than build up. She fosters evil war and battle. She is the Eris who threw the golden apple at the wedding feast and started the Trojan War. The good Eris is something subtler and more interesting, the spirit of competitive emulation, the desire to do as well as or better than one's neighbor, the envy that motivates effort rather than destruction. She makes the neighbor see the rich farmer and think not, I will steal his oxen, but I will work harder so that I too can have what he has. She is the force that drives craftsmen to improve their work, singers to sing better, farmers to plant more carefully. She is, in Hesiod's account, a gift from Zeus, not a comfortable gift, not a pleasant one, but a useful one, the force that makes human civilization possible by turning the energy of competition toward creation rather than destruction. The distinction has turned out to be one of the most durable ideas in the history of ethics. It reappears, in various forms, in Aristotle's discussion of emulation and envy, in Adam Smith's account of competition as the motor of economic improvement, in Nietzsche's distinction between noble competition and resentment, in modern economic theory's distinction between productive and destructive forms of rivalry. Hesiod identified a real psychological and social phenomenon, gave it a name, and placed it at the center of his account of human motivation. It is still there. The farmer's calendar and the practical wisdom. After the myths, Prometheus, Pandora, the 5 ages, the works and days turns to something that its title actually promises: work, and the days on which to do it. Hesiod spends the second half of his poem giving practical agricultural advice key to the movements of stars and the rhythm of the seasons. When the Pleiades rise in May, begin the harvest. When they set in November, begin plowing. When Arcturus rises in the evening, prune the vines. When the swallow arrives, plowing season begins. When the snail climbs the plant seeking escape from the Pleiades, it is time to stop digging vineyards and sharpen the sickles. The farmer's calendar is calibrated not by arbitrary dates but by observable celestial and natural phenomena, because in a world without mechanical clocks or universal calendars, the stars and the birds are the most reliable timekeepers available. Interspersed with the agricultural advice are moral maxims and practical rules that read like a concentrated handbook of archaic Greek ethics. Do not be ashamed to work, because shame attaches only to idleness. Treat your neighbors well, because you will need them. Pay back what you borrow. Do not commit adultery. Honor your parents. Give to those who give to you. Do not invite a man who has insulted you to dinner. The moral and the practical are not separated in Hesiod's world. Behaving correctly toward your neighbors is part of farming well, because social capital, the goodwill of your community, is an agricultural resource like soil or water. Break it and you will need it precisely when it is no longer there. Hesiod ends the poem with a calendar of lucky and unlucky days, the days of the month on which it is auspicious to begin projects, to marry, to plant trees, to shear sheep, to be born. This section has been somewhat embarrassing to later readers who want Hesiod to be a philosopher rather than a peasant. But it is entirely consistent with the poem's logic. In a world where the divine and the natural and the practical are not separate categories but aspects of the same reality, knowing which days the gods favor is as practically important as knowing when the Pleiades set. What Hesiod invented. The list of things that begin with Hesiod is surprisingly long. He invented the European tradition of didactic poetry, poetry that teaches rather than merely narrates. He invented the genre of agricultural poetry, which would reach its fullest expression in Virgil's Georgics, a poem that would not exist without the works and days as its model. He provided the systematic account of Greek divine genealogy that became the standard reference for ancient Greek religion. When later writers wanted to know who was whose parent in the divine family, they consulted Hesiod. He invented the 5 ages theory of historical decline, which has recurred in Western thought ever since, usually without explicit acknowledgement of its source. He invented the good strife/bad strife distinction, which has reappeared in philosophy and economics under various names for 2.5 millennia. He also invented something harder to name: the autobiographical voice in Western poetry. Before Hesiod, the I of Greek poetry was either absent, as in Homer, or used only in the brief personal passages of lyric poetry. Hesiod uses it to anchor an entire cosmological and ethical system in the experience of a specific person in a specific place with specific problems. The poem is universal because it is particular. Because Hesiod's quarrel with his brother and his hatred of Askra and his conviction that the gods favor the just are real, they carry the weight of conviction rather than the lightness of generalization. 3,000 years after a Boeotian farmer poet sat on a hillside and was visited by muses who told him they could lie or tell the truth depending on their mood, we are still reading what he wrote down. The muses, on this occasion, apparently chose the truth.